Hello, Sally.
Oh, hi, hi. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, good.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, it's nighttime and it's been quite hot, very rainy here.
Okay, yeah, because you're in Australia now.
Yeah, yeah. I'm in Australia.
Okay.
Yeah. How about you? How you
I'm
going?
in Italy, so yeah, the other completely the opposite timing and everything.
Yeah.
How was today? Has it been a good day? Will I like it? You've already had experienced it.
yeah, yeah. It was here.
Hey, well, I was just super excited to chat to Tom and yourself. It's this is a stellar episode. I'm really excited for this one.
Yeah, yeah. Good. Yeah. Do you? So I've got questions. Do you ask things as well, or
If you run out at the end, but it's best to. I found it more. The format's evolved, and it's better that you ask the questions, and because
yeah,
then it's different every time, and it's yeah. Also, you read the whole book, so
yeah,
what did you think? You could tell me
yeah? I
every
really
time.
liked it. Yeah, I really, honestly, really liked it.
Mm,
And will recommend um friends for friends to read it. And yeah,
yeah,
got quite a few friends who have similar interests in that sort of things in. But yeah,
it seems like a very necessary book. No, we're all very,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
it's something you're moving in that direction, and you've done this Rise Up song, which I'm in love with.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We did that for the environment and sort of community thing. Yeah, for where I live. Yeah, so definitely into all that sort of thing.
Yeah, so you're using your powers for good.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, I mean, you have great powers. You're, I mean, you're most famous for the one, two, three. We're diving straight into the interview here. This is not my normal conversational style, but one, two, three, four song by Feist
yeah,
is your big claim to fame, no?
yeah, yeah. That's my most successful
Yeah,
thing I've been a part of. Yeah,
that's an
it's
awesome song.
amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it was second. It was in Billboard. It was the voted the second best song of the year, apparently in all the world. So,
Yeah, and Time magazine and things like that.
oh, was it
People
Times? Oh,
just
yeah,
people just really seem to resonate with that song.
yeah.
And I remember a friend saying actually she was living in the UK and she said there was just nothing on the radio like that at the time when it came out as well. So that's why maybe it just stood out a bit because of that too.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's because you have so many great songs, so you must feel like a bit like this one. Did you know it was going to connect when you wrote it, or is that?
No, I just I wrote it thinking it sounded like a Feist song. And then that's kind of why I asked her if she wanted to sing it. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's hard as a songwriter, isn't it, to think,
Yeah,
will this song connect with everybody? Um,
this should probably this should hit this demographic because then you just because you're back in Australia now, but you did live in LA for a bit. Is that right?
yeah, I lived in LA for a few years.
What was that
But
like?
oh, great, yeah. Yeah, I really loved it. I've got a daughter and she was about 5, so she went to school and got a bit of an accent, and I wrote lots of songs with lots of different people and had quite a few friends, that lived there as well, just from people from Australia and then also people I'd just met sort of through the music industry over the years. Yeah, so I really loved it. It's good.
Yeah, I think if you want to develop as a songwriter, there was one bit of advice I heard in the songwriting podcast that it's moved to where all the songwriters are.
Yeah, I know. It's like, in all different types. And there is, I mean, it is, I guess, common knowledge in a way. There's a lot of positivity there, or just you feel supported by other songwriters and other people in the music industry. And it's not so much like a competition. It's just about all being there and working on great creative stuff and inspiring each other. So that was nice to experience that.
Wow. So why did you move back? Or you wanted for your daughter? Or
Well, yeah, I just felt like, I don't know, I really I mean, even though I loved living there, I just wanted to come back home to Australia. I live
Mm,
in Sydney, and I don't know, I just feel like this is where my body and soul want to be.
mm.
Who knows what I'll do in the future. But yeah, I just felt like I'd had a good time there, and it was time to come home.
Yeah, I traveled around Australia, on a kind of a couch concert, house concert tour, and when we stopped in Sydney, it was, it's a beautiful place with you've got all these little inlets and bays, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very interesting area. We stayed out near Byron Bay, and Byron Bay, and no, not Byron Bay. Sorry, that's further north. What was the name of the famous beach?
Bells
Bondi Beach.
Beach?
Bondi
Oh,
Beach.
Bondi, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry,
Bells Beach is in Victoria, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, they're all merging together in my mind. But yeah, it's just so many different districts. And which part are you in?
I live in the Northern Beaches, so that it's about an hour from the city up
Oh,
north,
so that's
right near the
why. Yeah.
beach. Yeah, it's
Oh,
very
that's
pretty.
cool.
It's just beautiful, so much nature. That's kind of why we wanted to come out here. And there's also Pittwater, which is like a huge body of water that there's lots of sailing boats and big walks that you can do all through bushland. And yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, because
Very
I
good
love.
for, yeah, it calms my system. And yeah, it's what I needed.
Yeah, that's what you need as a songwriter, isn't it? Because I don't know, you get quite out of yourself sometimes when you can get up very quickly. I don't know if you're the same personality, but yeah, I need a
Yeah.
grounding.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely feel, I mean, I love the city and I love cities and love visiting cities, but living a little bit out of the city, I definitely do feel more grounded and think that that's what, yeah, what I need in my life at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So what else? Are you working on a new album as well? Or you
Well, all
professional
right,
songwriter?
had it.
Are you, because you also written a book as well? It's like you're
Yeah.
doing a lot.
Yeah, I wrote a novel. That's why when I moved home from LA, I wrote a book, and that was a wonderful experience, and I loved it. And I've got an album finished, a solo album, and that will come out in a few months. So I'm doing all the sort of, I've made a video clip and preparing for all of that sort of thing, which is exciting. So I haven't done an album for a little while.
Yeah, it's been quite a while now in
Yeah.
music terms, I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
is your husband Darren producing that as well?
Yeah, Darren produced that, which is good. We work together. He's a producer and musician, and we work together sometimes, and then other times we do separate stuff. Yeah, but that was we recorded that together, and he definitely was the producer director, which is great, and sometimes there's a bit of conflict. But yeah, no, we're both really happy with it, and it is quite special when you can work with your partner. It's good.
Yeah, and he's not just for anyone that doesn't know, he's not just any producer. He has had some small success on his own.
Yeah, see, he founded or co-founded the Avalanches and was in the Avalanches for a long time. And then decided to sort of move away from that and just kind of do other different things. But yeah, he's really brilliant musically, and yeah, he just has an eccentric sort of doesn't want to follow the rules kind of style, which is
Mm.
good for me, it frees me up a bit.
Wow. Wow, that's some producer to have in-house. I mean,
Yeah.
literally in-house.
Yeah.
Because for this song, I'm gonna say you can work with our music team of producers. So, you know, obviously Darren's probably very busy, but if he wants to do anything, it'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still completely open to that. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Wow. So, and do you have have you already written the song for this one? Or you,
Well, I sort of have a song that could fit with this that I've never
okay,
recorded, but I think I would love writing songs, so I think I will want to write like a whole new thing. Yeah, but
that's great.
um, yeah, It's fun to I mean, the thing I love about songwriting is it's so fun to think, what is gonna inspire me? Like, what is gonna be that little spark that goes off? Because you just don't know, you can have a day where you're wandering around and then it's like, "Oh, wow, that's like a great thing to write a song about." So, yeah, it'll be fun to sort of just see what
Yeah, it's
we say.
it's funny and strange experience for us for this side of this project Podsongs with this songwriting. You know, you're charged with the inspiration for an hour, and I'm really up after the interview. I need to go and dig a hole and stick my feet into it afterwards to
Yeah.
discharge some energy. But yeah, songs really come straight away. Often it's just like, you know, the title, not even the title of their books, because sometimes, well, you know, when people have written their books, they've really put like a lot of thought into their books. You know, they've really these are smart people.
Yeah.
And, you know, they've done all the thinking, and you can just sometimes make the book jacket rhyme, the back cover, and then or there's just some snappy phrase he comes out with, and then you've got a title, and then that kind of you know things can flow from
Yeah.
that. And
It's helpful because I've found, especially if like when I was living in LA and even back here, if I'm writing a lot of songs all in one go, a lot of it is, what do I want to say? What is this going to be about? Because I love lyrics. And yeah, so doing a thing like this, it's like, great. He's gonna have something to say. He's gonna have,
oh
yeah, that really ignites fresh ideas, and yeah,
yeah,
which is
because
good. Then I find, mhm,
especially for someone like you who's writing so many songs, you look repeating yourself. You're worried about repeating yourself. This isn't
mhm.
new. This is a chance. You know, I don't think you've ever written a song about this subject before.
No, no, I don't think I have either.
It specifically, yeah,
Yeah, so that's really good.
yeah, great.
Yeah.
Um, I've had I've had guests on that've covered this similar area before. I see these patterns returning, like compassion and borders. I've had quite a few guests about international borders and how that causes so many problems, and corporations,
Mm,
how they cause so many problems. And it does seem to there do seem to be these patterns in the guests and what he's talking about. And I like how he's approaching it as from an evolutionary. He's an evolutionary biologist, yeah. So
mm,
he has this vocabulary, and he's kind of talk. I had also had Rupert Sheldrake on, who had this morphic resonance theory, and I don't think that they're not even sometimes talking to us so much as to talking to other, seem to be talking to other scientists, to try and convince them about the interconnectedness in this case. Or
mm. Um, yeah.
so I definitely get a lot from reading all these different, seeing all these different. It's like the elephant and the blind men. You know that analogy of these blind men who go into the who meet this elephant, and they each feel a different part of the elephant, and then someone says, "No, it is like a rope. Oh, it's like a tree. It's like a wall." And they're all adding something to my understanding of the world with all their different descriptions of things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice to read things where you're going, "Oh, oh, I hadn't thought about that in that way." Like, I love that, and that happened a few times while I was reading the book. Um, yeah, it's just the definition, I guess, of expanding your knowledge and, yeah, learning new things.
Mm, yeah.
It's just before there were all these cockatoos in the tree making such a loud noise, cockatoos, they're like an Australian native bird.
It's
So
bedtime for
it's
them, is it? The
so loud. Yeah, there's a big gum tree at the back, sort of near this window, and I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be funny if they're really loud." But yeah, they've all gone to sleep now,
because
and I
it's
can
some
hear I can hear the crickets and cicadas or,
wow.
bugs, and it's a lot of bugs,
Because it's summer for you,
spiders.
so you have a full season of
Yeah, yeah. It's been a very wet summer, so there's just, yeah. lots of animals. The Australian.
Well, we all follow Australian meteorology very closely because of all the you have in one or extreme to the other, aren't you? With fires and floods, and it's biblical.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. We've just had really bad floods, about 10 hours from us up north. Oh, just terrible. Like, I just kind of pick like, and I don't, everyone's complaining the government hasn't handled it properly and they need proper, like, environmental emergency things in place.
Hmm.
Just like loads of people, thousands of people suddenly kind of homeless and, must be awful. But then also with Ukraine happening, it's like my daughter keeps saying, "Mom, you should feel sorry for the people in Ukraine." I'm like, I do, but it's also bad for the people in the floods. Um, yeah, it's just crazy time.
And the fires as well. Did you get that in the summer? In the last summer?
Yeah, they weren't here, but it was very intense. It was just kind of worse than it's ever been, I think.
Right.
This was just before the pandemic started. We had these crazy fires here. Um, yeah, it was really wild. It was and there was thick smoke in the sky all throughout the city, like for days. At that, and I can't remember that ever happening. Where it's they were sort of saying, "Oh, actually, this is actually really bad for your health. People are going to need to wear masks and things." It was really frightening, but just also just a they're all just like wake up calls, really, for people to just really start making big changes in terms of climate.
Oh, that comes into our book. What we're talking about is
Yeah.
yeah, climate behavior and wow, yeah, you must have wondered what was happening. Then Corona came along, and you were locked down a lot in Australia. Yeah.
Yeah, because we were all like, the fires raise money, musicians raising money for the fires. And then it was bam, COVID. So yeah, but
At least you had your
but
masks ready. I mean,
yeah, I know.
geez.
Oh dear.
Well, at least nothing can go wrong now.
Oh, oh,
Yeah.
I don't know. So do you live in Rome?
I'm actually an hour and a half south of Napoli, so I'm in the
Oh,
countryside. Yeah. Yeah.
oh, nice.
Yeah, yeah,
Not
opposite the
neat.
Amalfi Coast. Yeah.
Oh, right. Oh my gosh, how nice.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Oh, yeah. We did a trip a couple of years ago. We went to Puglia. Is that how you say it?
Puglia. It's
Puglia?
spelled Puglia, but it's pronounced Puglia.
Puglia? Puglia? What's the other, like, Sister Nina or something? Or
Italy?
no, no, Puglia. And they have all the Trullo houses. We stayed in this amazing,
Yep, yep.
like, five-star rated Airbnb, those beautiful roofs on them.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
With horses and, oh, we just had the best time. We loved it. So beautiful there and so old
Oh, it is, yeah.
compared to here.
Well, it's beautiful where I am as well, but it's
Mm,
more mountains. It's a poorer area, and but you've got better architecture in Puglia. But you've got more nature here. It's like a big national
yeah.
parks with the seas and the mountains, and
Oh, nice.
yeah. Oh, is the man himself. Hello, Tom.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello?
Hello. Good. Hi. Hi. Nice to meet you, Sally.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Just give me a moment. I'm just going to check my. Yeah, the microphone is the right one. Um, okay. I think that's okay. Yeah. Great. Super. Well, thanks
Lovely.
so much for taking the time to chat.
No, thanks for your interest. Yeah, it's great. It's really exciting, actually. It's such
Yeah.
a nice idea to kind of combine music and literature, and yeah.
Yeah, you must get many people offering to write songs about the book, so it's great you chose us.
Well, no, I wish. This is the first time I've sort of heard of this idea of kind of music to the ideas in a book. I think it's really cool, though.
Yeah,
You should-
me too. Yeah. As soon as you emailed, I was like, sure, I love this idea.
It's just copying from the film industry. They do it all the time. You think they'd have be many good films without stealing from books. So you're just taking a leaf out of their playbook.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Well,
this
no,
is,
I'm intrigued to kind of, see how, well, how Sally's interpretation of the ideas are kind of converted into music.
Yeah. No. Well, I'm
well,
intrigued
she's,
as well. I don't know what I'll do.
yeah, we don't know where this is going to come from. So it might have, it's going to be a great song with Sally on board, but it's up to you. It's a lot of pressure on you there, Tom, as well, to pump us with inspiration for the next hour.
Right. Okay. I'll do my best to.
Yeah. So I think Sally's got a bunch of questions for you.
Yeah, I've got questions. Okay, here's my quizzes.
Sure. Go for it.
Okay. Right. I don't usually interview people, so um, bear with me. Okay, I'd like to start by asking if you could tell us a bit about yourself, things like where you grew up and what your childhood was like and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Sure. So, I was, I was actually born in Nairobi in Kenya, although I only lived there for a year. Um, and my parents were, my dad was a civil engineer, so we ended up there, and we also ended up in Malaysia. So I spent from when I was 5 years old till 10 in Malaysia, um, and
What?
then I lived in England the rest of the time. Um, so yeah, that's sort of my background. I've always had an interest in well, sort of nature and biology. And in Malaysia, I used to watch, these ants that would uh, work together, and weaver ants they're called, and they build a nest, pulling leaves together, and they even use the larvae as little miniature glue guns to kind of produce silk
Wow.
that lays the leaves together. And I was always just amazed how they kind of seamlessly, work as a unit, and kind of what creates that sense of wholeness in the ants. And then obviously there's analogies for how human society, could work or could not work. So I always had those interests, and that led me to a career in ecology. And but I've always used to read. I used to go to the library in Lancaster and get out books about kind of Buddhism and Zen and Taoism, and really had an interest in kind of Eastern religions. And then reading more recently how there's a lot of correlates in psychology. They're kind of finding a lot of the experiments in psychology almost essentially, um, proving what a lot of sort of Buddhist scholars kind of found through more introspective approaches. And then in the book, really, it was exciting for me because I kind of saw a way that these two sort of interests in my life would come together, because I kind of quickly realized that if you want to protect nature, it's not in the realm of ecology. You have to kind of move and think about other topics like economics, but actually even beyond that, why people make decisions and how we influence, society's decisions. And then it goes into psychology. And then even then the real sort of deeper changes that we kind of really need to protect nature are kind of much deeper at the level of identity. And actually that's where these ideas about sort of concepts of, you know, moving away from this isolated individualism towards a much greater sort of collective sense of self engenders that sort of care that people then put into their actions about protecting the natural world. So it was nice to sort of feel those interests coming together in the book.
Great. Okay, so I actually had a question high up the top of my list, which I'll go to now because you already mentioned it. I really loved your fascination with ants after reading your book, and how you described them. Was it like a society, something like they work as a society? Did you want to talk a little more about that? I know you just kind of touched on that a bit. Like why, what else was it with ants that you just loved, even since when you were a boy?
Yeah, I think the ants work together. So because they essentially are like a superorganism. I mean, literally, because the workers forego reproduction, and then the queen is the reproductive unit. So they're actually working together as one kind of unit. And in a way, the levels of cooperation are sort of huge in those ant colonies, and it's just amazing as well how they um, develop these complex cooperative behaviors to allow them to persist and kind of adapt to the environment. And humans, actually, we're also the most sort of mutualistic species, in the sense that we help each other and cooperate. I mean, any little thing, this notepad, whatever, is the product of 1,000 minds. Who designed the card, who designed the paper, who transported the products, who cut the trees down. All those minds are coming together in that one object. And in that sense, I just find that fascinating, the way that society can work in such a kind of integrated way to produce all this kind of abundance and that we have. But equally, the actions of society can be kind of harmful for our own sort of persistence, and it's trying to understand the ways we can better work together. I'm not suggesting that we move to the form of social organization ants have, and have one giant queen that reproduces. I mean, you could imagine a dystopian future where people were sterilized, and then there was some genetic selection of babies that was centralized through the state. But that's certainly not what I'm talking about. But actually,
That's a good film idea if someone wanted to do like a bit of a B grade
yeah,
film.
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, a bit sinister, and but I think just but moving towards that sense of a collective identity, and in the world today, we're split into fragmented nations, and these compete with each other. And actually, for me, this sense, because we live on a globalized planet and our economies are globalized, and our impacts on the world are globalized, whether it's the climate or air pollution or biodiversity or ocean acidification. We need this sort of more globalized sense of citizenship. And so to see ourselves as one sort of entity of humankind. And to me, that's important, because otherwise we won't effectively function together. It's like an ant colony where there's, massive contests between different factions. We kind of need to resolve that. And for me, our identity is a kind of key element for that.
And you say also when ants get a virus, they take the one out and kill him, and then do social distancing.
Yeah. They're it's amazing their behaviors that they sort of really complex behaviors. I mean, you think their brains are just the size of not much more than a pinhead, I suppose. But these complex behaviors are actually sort of part of their it's just the way they work together. Those kind of social rules and kind of behaviors are part of sort of at the level of the colony.
Great. Okay. Next question is, I was really fascinated by the sections in your book about the butterfly effect, followed by genuinely believable theories that we risk the extinction of our own species. Can you refresh our minds with an explanation of the butterfly effect and talk us through this very confronting concept that without focusing on connection, humans could face extinction?
Yeah. Okay. That's a big question for Monday morning.
Sorry.
No, it's good. I
Like
like
they were going to be easy, did we?
Yeah.
First,
Yeah.
butterfly effect first.
Can you just solve the world before breakfast? And no, I think it's the butterfly effect is a nice sort of concept. It was first named from a conference, a presentation by someone called I'm going to get the name wrong now. I think it's Conrad Lorenz.
Yeah.
And he was developing computer models and realized that a very small change, like literally decimal points in the sort of starting parameters, he was trying to model the weather, and it would produce completely different weather patterns based on these very tiny sort of changes. And this is so it kind of brings together the idea that this is a sort of one big global weather system, obviously, and actually tiny changes in one part can cause an impact elsewhere. So his idea was, or the way he kind of framed it was like a butterfly flapping its wings in one country could cause a tornado in another country through this kind of correlated, relationships. And actually, our, systems are like that. We're deeply connected in the sense that when it might not seem a lot, but when we buy a product or something, the impacts kind of ripple across the world and might lead to, destruction of a rainforest if it's, a product containing palm oil and it's destroying the habitats of orangutans and rainforests, and maybe having social impacts. I mean, it's a small effect, but those, there are billions of us and we buy many things on a daily basis. So those impacts kind of accumulate and ripple across the world to create these sort of tidal waves of destruction. Or equally, if we, we can reverse that and create sort of very positive impacts elsewhere as well. So we have that power and that influence through these connected systems. But it also goes beyond our sort of physical actions. It's also about our mindsets and the way we talk and our cultures as well, because we are sort of immersed ourselves. We are creatures of language, and we sort of absorb our culture through language, whether it's what we read or the music that we hear or how we speak to each other. And those words are very important in kind of structuring the way we think. So even on the basis of just how we talk to each other and how we frame, that creates these contagion effects, which then sort of can change culture. So very sort of individualistic language and saying, greed is good or whatever, actually, can have an impact on how other people perceive the world as well. It frames their cognition. So, extending the kind of analogy of the butterfly effect, it's not just that a butterfly flapping its wings in one country could cause a tornado actually elsewhere. By us, for example, thinking in a more sort of pro-environmental, pro-social mindset, ultimately through a sense of kind of love, that because we care about the world, we see other species and other people as part of ourselves. So thinking about a butterfly and protecting a butterfly can actually lead to impacts, on the other side of the world where butterflies might be protected because, we're not destroying, grassland habitats or rainforest habitats where butterflies reside. So that connectedness goes beyond just the sort of physical realm, but actually into our mental realms as well. And the links between what's in our minds and actually the reality, the physical reality all around the world is it's clear that those connections exist.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Thinking about First Nation Australians, who are the world's oldest civilization, along with other indigenous peoples and tribes from around the world, almost all of these, or pretty much all of these cultures from thousands of years ago, place a deep sense of importance on the connectedness between humans and nature. Do you agree that we have a lot to learn from these peoples, and how can we incorporate their culture within our modern world?
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's a sort of dangerous sense of arrogance in our kind of modern Western view sometimes. It's so short term, and we think because we've had all these technological advances that, we're at the kind of frontier of everything. But actually, I do think there's a strong case that we haven't actually developed in a kind of moral or spiritual sense very much at all. And in fact, you could make some argument that in many cases there's been some regression, and actually many indigenous cultures actually had much more sophisticated kind of ways of enabling kind of not just morality, but also sort of a closer sense of spirituality and a sense of direct sort of connectedness. And for example, some cultures, they would take things like magic mushrooms or things like that, and actually through different practices would create that kind of direct spiritual experience on individual people. Whereas we in some cases, we very much organized religions have gone down the way of saying, well, it's the priest who has the contact with God, and then you've just got to listen to what the priest says, and that actually divorces that direct connection. So both sort of a direct spirituality, which in many ancient traditions, and even ancient Christian mystic traditions, as well as Buddhism and Zen and Hinduism, each of these and indigenous cultures have early on had much more direct sort of spiritual kind of connections, and they also had a sort of more sophisticated morals in some case, like thinking about 7 generations ahead and 7 generations in the past. So thinking about what decisions you might make, well, how would it affect 7 generations forward? I mean, that's crazy. We don't think of that now, about how will my decisions now affect someone 150 years in the future. It's lucky if you think about what's going to happen, like in 2 months. We're that short term, and that's probably because of our high pace of technology and culture and social media and industrialization, and every sort of minute it counts now. Whereas that kind of taking the longer view, I think, is a feature of many of those indigenous cultures. So essentially, it's wisdom. It's wisdom through direct contact with nature and introspection, and through kind of cultures which respect nature and have that. A lot of those cultures see nature as an ancestor, a sort of part of it, that sense of kinship. And that occurs all around the world in many indigenous cultures. And it's something that we've lost, because we very much have this idea of human exceptionalism, that we are, there's humans and then there's animals. Well, there's not. We are deeply connected at level of DNA, and yeah, that sense of kinship with the natural world is something that we've lost, I think.
It's very beautiful. It's a very beautiful part of their cultures, I think. And yeah, I know here in Australia, there are people who are really working on trying to have those indigenous belief systems and that sort of thing
Yeah.
back into Western culture.
Yeah, I think there's a lot we can learn.
Yeah. Okay, this is kind of just bit next step from what we were just talking about. So in terms of climate change and the catastrophic disasters we're witnessing around the world, why is it so important for us to develop a closer relationship with nature and to stop seeing nature as external from us?
So yeah, I think that's a really important point, given where we are in a kind of sort of dangerous position of creating this crisis, not just of climate change, but other crises that are linked as well, sort of biodiversity loss and air pollution, etc. And one of the core sort of ways we can transform the system is these deeper changes, not trying to sort of, I mean, obviously it's important to change, economic regulations and taxes and, incentives, but actually those institutional elements are kind of on the surface, as it were. And you can make those changes to those elements, but you won't fix the deeper problem, which is, our worldviews are structured, create those structures. And, they create our institutions, how we educate people, what our government looks like, what our legislative systems look like. So all those institutions stem from our worldviews. So people trying to create this sort of fixes at the outer level is fine, but we also need to create this deeper transformation at the inner level.
Revolution.
Sorry?
Yeah. Revolution.
An inner revolution, yeah. I think it really needs that to go to the heart of the problem, as it were. And so and that relates to our mindsets. Now, so we've had this many from the Enlightenment, as it were. Rene Descartes having this idea that a mind and the body is split, and our bodies are sort of just machines, and then the divine element is in our sort of human minds. Again, this sort of human exceptionalism, and the body is just sort of bunch of matter that we just direct around, like driving a tank around or something. But actually, that world and that mechanistic worldview is carried, through into the modern day. But actually, and what it leads to is a sense of ultimately kind of isolated individualism, and at its extreme, it becomes narcissism, where we just think here's me in the world, and I just need to look after myself, and it doesn't matter what I do to other entities because they are other, and I'm me, and I'm kind of calculating the benefits that accrue to me. And that culture has led to, damage in the world because we can sort of offset our damages and create pollution or impact species, impact other people. So to solve that, I really think it needs a kind of change in our identity where we bring in those other, we expand our sense of self-identity, and our sense of care goes from beyond just caring about me or my family to actually seeing other people and other species as part of our kin. And then there was a philosopher called Arne Naess, and a Norwegian philosopher, and this was his idea that we could develop this ecological self, which we see, everything on the planet as part of ourselves, and so the sense of care becomes extended. That was sort of quite speculative, but actually, there's been hundreds of papers in environmental psychology in recent years which have shown Arne Naess to be essentially right. When people have this sense of identity which incorporates other entities, that they actually, looking after them is not it's not an altruistic act. You're not doing something to help something else at the cost to you. You're doing it because actually you see that as just looking after, a broader a sense of care. So that's, when people feel this sense of connectedness to nature, for example, and you can measure that with various sort of surveys. So things like they'll ask questions, how much do you see nature as part of us? Questions like this. When people score high on those surveys, they tend to recycle more. They volunteer for environmental causes. They reduce their carbon footprint. So, and obviously, then they also vote in a way which is, trying to change governance. And so, you can see those changes both at the sort of level of what we buy in our consumption and how we travel, but also how we then structure our institutions. If we're a teacher, it will affect how we teach people. So all those sort of education systems, legal systems, economic systems kind of flow from those mindsets. So I think, it's important. And that also, sometimes these problems like climate change can seem so daunting because it's out there, it's something so much bigger what I can do, but actually, we see some of the solutions are in our minds right now. They're the way we view ourselves, the way we feel connected to nature. And then that affects how we act, how we talk, how we relate to others. And that can create these sort of contagion effects, which creates quite a very sort of rapid change potential.
Yeah. Yep. I might actually just cut to this question, seeing as you were just talking about that. I loved the part in your book about our minds, because I love the mind. And I just have here, I agree with the sections in your book where you talk about our interconnected minds and how we are often unaware of how connected to other people we really are. So in you just saying, if there's a teacher and she's connected to nature, then that's the way she's going to teach, or he. I love the sentence that you wrote that says, and I quote, "Emotions are also transferred between people by chemical messages in the air." Can you please expand on this concept?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's some interesting sort of studies that go on to sort of reveal our hidden influences that we have on one another. I mean, the way we think and our emotions, our cognition is sort of embodied. It's very much depends on our physiology, even to the extent, many of us have read about sort of gut bacteria and how they can actually, affect our moods. So, so the way we act and the way we feel very much depends on our physiology, and also pheromones, which are sort of smell chemicals that we produce all the time, can actually influence each other as well. So they that sort of physical mechanisms, essentially, in the same room as other people, we can transfer emotions, both negative and positive emotions. So there's some really kind of neat experiments showing, I mean, from the sort of negative emotion side, like there's feelings of sort of fear and anxiety can be transferred between people, even though there's no kind of words being spoken. So they have some experiments where they put people in a stressful situation, like doing a stressful exam or skydiving, and make them wear a t-shirt. And then they have a control set of participants who are doing some kind of exercise. So they may be sweating, but not in a way not caused by sort of anxiety. So then they take the two sets of t-shirts and then they put them on mannequins. And these mannequins are the type that dentists perform. They practice dental surgery on these mannequins. And some are dressed in the t-shirts with the kind of anxiety chemicals on, and some are the controls, sort of still sweaty, but not you wouldn't tell the difference consciously. But then they measure how many mistakes the dentists make, and the dentists make more mistakes when they're exposed to these chemicals that were on in the anxiety treatment. So we're influencing each other all the time just through the sort of hidden chemicals in the air. And actually, there's more research done recently about positive emotional contagion as well through pheromones. So there's that physical sense of connectedness, and but even just through our for example, through our social networks, we're influencing each other. And there's some nice studies showing that even people you haven't met in your social network are kind of influencing your behaviors and your tastes and preferences. So that those effects are obviously mediated through how people speak and how they react, and that we are connected to. So this kind of a contagion of ideas and preferences, and your risk of obesity, your risk of suicide is influenced by people you've never met in these social networks.
Yes.
And so it matters how we talk, and obviously that then is a reflection of our sort of deeper mindsets as well.
Mm. Yeah, it's fascinating. Back to some environmental stuff now. You mentioned over an email that I got that you probably don't know that I got, that you've recently become interested in links between global environmental change and our self-identity. Could you tell us more about this and the concept of vicious cycles versus virtuous cycles?
Yeah, sure. So I guess these the book, the Self-Delusion, is very much about our a kind of systems approach to the human condition. It's this idea that energy, sort of matter, flows through us, and we can talk about that, our cells and DNA, and actually we think we're sort of discrete, but we're not. We're sort of deeply connected at a physical level. And then we've talked about the sort of minds and how our minds are porous and we influence each other. So this idea that energy and kind of information just sort of flows through people, essentially, and energy, matter, and information. But that's kind of systems approach. I've been more recently sort of working and looking at larger systems and sort of the planetary system as well, and how these kind of connections, as we talked about, the sort of butterfly effect, and these sort of systemic processes at larger scales. And one of those are known as vicious cycles, where you have this kind of negative cycle, a sort of spiral of decline. And I think that there's a real danger that we don't often recognize those, because these cycles can be quite sort of complex. But there's lots of evidence that as we talked about, when people feel more individualistic, and when cultures sort of encourage us to become more individualistic and essentially selfish, that then destroys the environment, because it leads to people being less careful in their behaviors about how they protect the natural world. Then the consequences of that, a degradation of the environment, and then that actually can lead to a worsening of that cycle. Because essentially, when if we remove nature from our towns and cities, and they become sort of urban areas that are sort of ugly, and we don't have exposure to that kind of nature, then that causes mental health problems, and it reduces our capacity to develop pro-environmental behavior. And also, how do you love nature if you've not grown up in a place where you can kind of experience it? If you speak to many people who really sort of nature's sort of really important to them, it's often because they've had a formative experience when they were younger, when they like I was talking about seeing the weaver ants on the plants. Well, if I'd have been brought up in an urban, city where there were no ants, I wouldn't have had that experience, and I wouldn't have had the love of nature in that sense. So it's really important that we, rewild our towns and cities and villages so that we can actually expose young people to nature and they can forge those important bonds and kind of restore that sense of identity. There was also other processes that go on that kind of create those vicious cycles. So at the level of how we respond to shocks in society, and there's some really nice research that, well, I say nice, but also quite worrying, that when countries are exposed to shocks, like not just financial shocks or things like earthquakes, but also what climate change is doing as well, wildfires and floods, then those societies respond, and it's responding in an adaptive way, because what they do is they stick together, they become tighter, and so they develop a much more sort of coherent, smaller identity. But that comes at the expense of antagonism with outgroups. So you can see, and you can see this happening with, let's say in America, when they're saying, America first, it's a coherency within America, but it's coming at the expense of saying build a wall and, don't let, other people into our country. And the same in the UK, we've had Brexit, where we've, which is basically saying, let's divorce ourselves from Europe, and let's, we don't want migration, etc. So you see this kind of fragmentation into smaller groups that become tight themselves, but actually have more antagonism elsewhere. And that's problematic, because a lot of the problems like climate change and biodiversity loss and air pollution and ocean pollution are all transnational. They're kind of beyond national borders. And actually going into these smaller groups at the level of nations or even regions, it is really problematic, because actually this is a time when, in the face of these big global crises, we need to step up and become, in my view, much more embracing of other cultures and other places, and reduce that xenophobia, and actually develop this more sense of global citizenship and sort of, the oneness of humanity as well as all life, as opposed to saying, let's stick together in our nation and we can ride this out. Because in the face of globalized problems, you can't just shut yourself off from the world. They're going to come back and bite you. So there's a danger that, we're at this crossroads where we either go, and there are some positive shoots, and maybe that kind of should talk about not just the negative, but the positive side is the virtuous cycles, that if you do create this sense of sort of larger identity, and maybe we do see it in like the school climate strikes and certain groups that, let's say the school children going on strike, they're saying, this is my education at risk here, but I'm doing it because there's a sense of like, I want to protect the planet, and I feel a sense of responsibility to the world and future generations. And that sense of identity, I think, is very promising, because that's the type of shift we need to solve these problems.
Yeah, I went to one of those school strikes with my daughter, and it was really wild to see just all these young people, and you feel there was energy being exchanged in the air, just of what you were saying of teaching them to look outside of their own little world and look at the global world, and in order to become more aware about climate and things like that. Yeah.
Do
Do you think like we're also, because we're in a country where I'm in Italy, they have the different dialects, in different countries, different valleys,
Mhm.
because they're very, so before they were all much more tribal. Now, do you think it's like, now they're in bigger countries, do you think they are less self, and they're in a bigger tribe? Do you think that helps, or?
I mean, I suppose there has to be a way to organize societies that it reconciles these different levels. It's not when they're sort of talking about global citizenship, it's not this idea that we just enter a big melting pot and we become homogenized, because I think that would be, a travesty in a way, because
Because that is happening, though, isn't it? Because we're all educated the same way, we all watch the same TV shows, we're all in the same
yeah,
news channels, social media.
yeah, and that itself, can be problematic. So I think these cultures that have developed, there's value in those different viewpoints and different perspectives. So it's more about kind of unity and diversity. And, you know, many countries are actually founded on those ideas, like the European Union's logo and the USA logo. It's USA is pluribus unum, from the many one, and the similar idea with the European Union one, which I won't say because I'll probably get the Latin wrong. But essentially, the idea is sort of unity and diversity, and it's this idea that we you know, these cultures are valuable and amazing, but actually we work as a sort of larger unit as well. And I think yeah, that's important, certainly.
What are your tips for helping others to feel more connected with humans and with nature? Like people, I guess, that more introverted or socially anxious. Like, yeah, because yeah, we know that it is so important to be connected. You got any tips for people like that?
Yeah, I think I think there's no one size fits all solution, because people, you know, come from different backgrounds. They've got different sort of interests, and there are different ways to maybe move towards that expanding sort of worldview and sense of self. And for some people, it might come through you know, introspective practice like mindfulness meditation. And there's lots of science showing that actually, I mean, really, you know, sophisticated science, look at the level of, you know, neuroscience, looking at how regions in the brain, there's an area called the default mode network, which is responsible for our kind of self-rumination. Well, actually, these areas get sort of down-regulated when we meditate for longer periods, or just not even long time, but just, you know, 10 minutes a day, 5 days a week or something, can actually have noticeable changes in our brains that actually makes us less of that stronger sort of egoic identity where we, you know, we feel isolated and individuals, and then much more of a yeah, a sense of connection to the rest of the world, and greater empathy and compassion. So, you know, that's one clear route, which is well evidenced by science. The other approach is some people like to look outwards and feel more connected to nature. And so, you know, just going for a nature walk, but not, you know, walking along looking at your phone. You have to actually be actively experiencing nature.
And it's an audio book podcast.
Yeah, well, I'll come on to that in a moment. Actually, there is that's another sort of possible route. But I think the experience in nature route is very much, it's about not just sort of even the duration of time that you're outdoors, but the kind of, it's the moments, I suppose, not the minutes. It's those moments where you're really experiencing nature through painting or just watching or listening to birdsong, and that can create this yeah, reduce this sense of isolated individualism. And also it's there's lots of evidence showing it has benefits for mental health in terms of reducing anxiety and depression and stress. So those are practices, and practices are very important because you can know the theory. Like I could know the theory of how an Olympic archer fires an arrow into a target. You could explain in detail like how, you know, the movements and where you should be placed, but I couldn't go and do it. You know, you have to then train. And you're musicians, you know, that's supposed, you know, it's the actual training of the neural networks that allow you to play the instrument. It's not just the theory, it's a sort of combination of both. But the theory is important in a way because maybe it can help us when we understand the importance of the practice. It kind of gives us motivation to do it. So I think that's where sort of, for me, the book that I wrote was trying to, partly it was a sort of learning experience and really delving into some of these ideas and synthesizing those different elements around sort of inner change and kind of outer protect, you know, conservation. But also it was to see, well, if I kind of envisioned each chapter almost being like a painting, and the idea was to sort of, it touches on a different aspect of how we're connected from our physical bodies and our bacteria and, you know, all these you know, our DNA kind of just being essentially one web, of connectedness, that we're just a part of that. So all these ideas is each chapter is sort of individually like that, and the idea was that maybe it creates this sense of connectedness, and I wanted to sort of measure that. So there's a survey that I associated with the book, and people could do it before and after, and the idea was to see if it does engender that sense of connectedness. And there's some, it's still early days, but it's looking like it can increase that sense of nature connectedness and social connectedness. But I don't think that's just the solution. Just knowledge is not the key. I think the practice is crucially important. And, even I've written the book and pulled the ideas together, but it's quite likely that as unless you kind of revisit the ideas and put them into practice through, through trying to create these experiences of connectedness, that you can kind of lose it, because as we've talked about, our minds are like sponges. And so if you're in a culture which is very sort of consumerist and materialist and individualistic, it's very difficult not to suddenly snap back into that mode of kind of isolated egoic thinking.
Mm. Do you want another question from me?
Maybe just jump in with something. I was thinking what you said about, I was wondering whether the sense of self is more developed now or less developed, because you talk a lot about Buddhist meditation. So I heard someone say somewhere about mindfulness techniques that they were actually developed in the Buddhist time when people actually had a stronger sense of self. They had more stresses. They were fighting for their food and more, different educations and particularly Vipassana and things like that. It's very hard. And to break down that sense of identity, do you think perhaps people now have a less developed sense of self?
Yeah, and I think there's some if some psychologists talk, for example, about that you need, and this was the big push for sort of developing self-esteem, I guess, initially from the sort of 80s onwards, that, it's building self-esteem because it's important, and to have this kind of sense of self allows people to kind of be resilient and to ride through the stresses of life. And, you can see that there's some logic in those arguments. And actually, when sort of meditation approaches, they're not about not allowing that sense of self to develop, but they're about recognizing that we have an ego, and but it goes beyond that. And having an ego is important because it allows us to function on an everyday basis. We need a sense of self, and part of the book is talking about the evolution of our sense of self. It allows us to interact socially. It allows us to hold memories in a sort of coherent whole, and so we can act in the world. So it's not about abolishing the sense of self, because we'd all just be bumbling around with no objectives and no way to kind of allow us to survive. But actually, it's about recognizing that we have an ego, but not allowing it to become so strong that it twists reality into something that it's not, and we're into this sort of delusion that we are completely isolated. Because yes, we have a sense of self, but actually we are also part of these much greater wholes. And there's some research, for example, that shows that when people have this sort of metapersonal identity, so beyond personal, metapersonal, they don't lose the ego, they just have it as well. So they can switch between the different ways of thinking. They can think at a higher level and being part of a sort of greater entity, and they can think at the sort of egoic level as well. But people who haven't developed that sort of metapersonal level of identity are kind of trapped in that sort of more egoic thinking. So I think, it's not about saying we don't need a sense of self. It's about saying, yes, a sense of self is an important part of even of mental health, but actually going beyond that, we can become even more, we can develop even further and recognize its limitations.
That's an interesting, like for a psychologist, that's really interesting. If too much ego or not strong enough ego it's destroying the planet. And of quite a few, I guess, talking about corporations, and had Joel Bakan on, and he really opened my eyes that corporations have a psychopathic personality. and they are destroying the planet and all their actions, because things like recycling, the idea of recycling, it was a corporate idea to push the responsibility onto us. And these ideas that we're affecting the climate and our decisions, which companies we shop with, it's the corporate structure that is destroying the planet. And they have the legal rights of a person, but they have a psychopathic personality. So it's their behavior that we have to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And and I think there's a danger that we can sort of, some people will say, oh, it's all the system and, you know, it's out there. But actually, I think, I mean, I agree with what you say there, the sentiment that we've created these companies that essentially, yeah, to some degree are, especially, you know, when they're just developing profit for shareholders at the exclusion of all else. And even if it then creates these terrible impacts elsewhere. And but there's sort of more, there are some newer framings for companies around sort of B Corps, you know, benefit corporations that try to think about the broader sort of set of stakeholders.
And they're a drop in the ocean, aren't they?
They are, yeah. I think but those changes in mindsets about, you know, what is a company for, and deeper sort of thinking about our own responsibilities in the world can then transform those structures. And I think that's the links between those, yeah, the inner and the outer really interests me in terms of, you know, how we can kind of change mindsets and cascade up to create those institutional changes around companies and our legislative systems, but equally how those systems also influence people and can sometimes constrain us. And so it's a sort of back and forth, and there's no, if someone tells you they know the answer, that it's all in the system or it's all in the mindset, you know, it's not right, because it's a sort of complex set of feedbacks. But what that does mean is that there's opportunities to intervene at different points. And so, you know, in any kind of vicious cycle, as it were, there's kind of multiple places that we could start to try to change things. Yeah. I mean, for
big subject, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think there's a danger as well that sort of, and I don't want to sort of problematize it, as it were, and I think there's also even though, you know, the world is changing in a way which some might say is very worrying, and is very worrying in terms of climate change and you know, some of these, you know, war, etc., that we see. I think there's also a growing awareness and there's a potential for a kind of remarkable transformation in human identity. And I think we're at the cusp of that, in a bigger change in consciousness, where we start to, you know, become much more almost a sense of global consciousness. And I'm not talking about that we'll just become one big mind, because it's not like we're going to, like the ants, where we operate as a genuine superorganism in that sense, homogenized, but actually, you know, but the extent at which we can move people from these sort of isolated, egoic, you know, people feeling unhappy because they're isolated and they're anxious and depressed, to a much more broader sense of identity. And I think for me that we shouldn't forget the kind of awe and the beauty that you get from sort of a worldview of which sort of emphasizes this connectedness. And, you know, from just as a biologist, you know, the connectedness of life is amazing, really, that even our DNA, you know, it flows through us. It's not ours. It comes from our ancestors, and we'll pass it on to ancestors to come. And actually, a lot of that DNA comes from other organisms as well. So we're 30% or 33% bacterial DNA in us. And I like to think of it as kind of, well, I suppose as musicians, it's probably an apt analogy that if you think of the DNA, the bacteria or the early cells that first evolved, kind of playing a rhythm or something, and then we've, you know, multicellular life and eukaryotic life has then built upon that rhythm. So we've still got the base rhythm, the 33%, that is genuinely the bacterial code, is in us. But then we've got these other elements, and we share like 95, 99% of our DNA with other apes as well, and not more than 99.9% with other humans. So we're all just variations on a kind of, you know, musical score that's been layered up over evolution. And I mean, I suppose Sally's song, you had a song called "We Are the Music," which in a sense is maybe at there that that kind of harmony of life. And some biologists, like there was one called Lynn Margulis, who saw life as one sort of great interconnected entity, which is sort of taking over the whole earth. And for me, that there's a kind of awe in that sense of oneness that, you know, and it's not, it requires a bit of imagination, but actually it's the physical truth in terms of just the biology of it. And I think, you know, overcoming that illusion and this sort of delusion, if it's a harmful illusion, is actually, it creates a sense of relief and expansiveness and joy. So even in the face of crisis and the kind of global crisis, you know, we can still find that joy and find that resilience. And yeah, I think for me that's an important theme at the moment, sort of finding in joy in adversity, because, you know, we're in troubled times, but at the same time, it only takes one moment to kind of realize the truth of your existence and find joy in that. So I think, yeah.
The lyrics here, just write them down. I think joy.
I was going to ask if you're working on another book at the moment, or are you not working on another book?
No, I'm trying to, yeah. And I think that some of the ideas we discussed about those larger cycles around the vicious cycles and the virtuous cycles is something I'm interested in. And it's our human relationship with nature, and how that can create, you know, we can degrade that relationship, or we can actually restore it. And actually it's maybe like a spiral, a human nature spiral in a sense, because our relationship with nature we can feel that we're separate, like the spiral spinning apart, and it can be negative sort of spirals, but also we can actually restore it, and we can feel more connected to nature. And as we restore nature and we bring it back to our towns and cities, and we you know, we learn about it and we feel more connected, we look after it more. So again, nature is then more restored. So it's creating that virtuous cycle. And actually, the nice idea of a spiral is that it's not a separate. The two elements on a spiral are not separate. That's all part of the same entity anyway. So I think that's the next topic. It follows on from the self-delusion, but it's much more about sort of nature relationships.
Okay, it sounds great.
Yeah, it's such a uplifting message, but at the same time, it's very materialistic, you know, because you actually broke my heart with one sentence in your book. You said, my tendency to intuitively believe in mind over matter and more generally in the supernatural was an inherent cognitive bias, a systematic failure in rational judgment. Like, so where's the spirituality here? You know, where's it gone?
So, yeah. So that was that sentence was saying that, okay, when I was younger, just to add the context, that I've, you know, this intuitive belief that we could sort of, you know, influence the natural world with our minds.
Yeah.
Which,
yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Well,
Brain.
I think that for me, because I was thinking of these experiments, like maybe, and I mean, literally, I was thinking, okay, well, can we influence the way an insect turns left or right if we just concentrate on it? And you know, now I realize, understanding how insect behavior works and how kind of, you know, brain waves work, I think that's a fanciful theory. It wasn't non-scientific in the sense that I wanted to test it with an experiment, but actually, it just was probably a very long shot of a hypothesis.
But what about the soul and reincarnation and spirituality?
Well, I think this is the other part of that sentence that you read, that saying, well, I realized that supernatural element, you know, was fanciful, but actually even deeper than that, I realized that the kind of idea that we have a mind that's separate, it is itself an illusion. And that to me was a sort of deeper finding that yeah, I felt I've been living a lot of my life under the illusion that you have a kind of discrete mind, but actually it's
So you're saying God? Do you believe in God? There is universal.
Yeah, not in the traditional sense of a kind of a
Individual.
father figure sat in the clouds, but actually maybe a more pantheistic idea of that God is in everything, and it's the fractal nature of spirituality, that you can look at a leaf, and if you stare at a tiny part of a leaf, and actually it holds the whole universe there because of that connectedness and links to everything else. That you can look at any small part of the universe and see that bigger picture.
So you are spiritual then? I'm not quite. You're not really answering the question.
No, yes, yeah, no, yeah, and I'm
trying to get because everyone's to the left or the right of some people.
Yeah, I think spirituality is really important. I think we've underplayed it in our kind of materialistic, sort of mechanistic worldview, but I think that's changing. But also, I think it's not a rejection of all the Enlightenment principles about and rationality, and it's not saying that that's all wrong and let's go back to, just make things that aren't logical. It's about a sort of evidence-based spirituality, and I think this idea that for example, we can now sort of start to measure what practices that allow you to feel a greater connection to, if you want to call it God or nature or oneness. But we can actually, in an evidence-based way, we'll say, okay, does reading this book work? What about a computer game? Can you devise a computer game that makes you feel more connected to other people? What about a song? Can you do a before and after study of, how do people feel before listening to a song and after? And so you can start to see, well, what things work best. And then we can maybe see avenues to develop our education systems in a way where we're not essentially doing the opposite of basically surrounding our children with cultures that says, be more individualistic and build self-esteem and sell yourself as a brand. I mean, that is such a sickening message to me, to sort of sell yourself as a brand, because a brand is something that's, it's constant and it's solid and it's there. But actually, we know that the human mind and our identities are sort of in a state of flux and connectedness. So trying to sort of think of yourself as a brand, even though the inherent truth is that you're changing all the time, obviously creates that sense of cognitive dissonance, which is then obviously going to create anxiety. So I think we haven't done our kids any favors with the way we've sort of surrounded them with this culture. But actually, this evidence-based spirituality, maybe we've got a way to sort of say, well, here are different practices and approaches to become more aware of your body and your physiology, and in touch with your emotions. Here's a way to meditate and become more resilient in that sense to stresses, to feel more connected, to feel joy, to feel happiness. There's some really nice work about sense of awe, that when people feel a sense of awe, that they tend to then have more pro-social behaviors as well, and look after the world. Because what a sense of awe is doing is suddenly it's breaking down in a kind of moment that sense of isolated individuality, and just making you realize that there's more to the world than what's in your own head and your own thoughts, and that there's this huge big world out there of like planets and dinosaurs and nature and giant redwood trees. And that sense of shattering of the kind of just me and my mind creates that instant sense of something bigger, and then that then engenders a sense of sort of compassion and pro-environmental and pro-social sentiment in people, I guess. So I think there's a really important avenue for art, and this is from a scientist saying, but I do think it's really important, because it's through those sense of that sense of awe that we find some of that spiritual connection, and then we can measure it through science. And that sounds a bit cold-hearted, but actually, we can then start to understand, well, what types of approaches are most effective at engendering that sense of awe. So it's a complementary.
I get it.
One without the other.
You're like a gateway drug. You're like trained to the system from within, you're behind the lines.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, how do you mean, like how
trying to transform the way science, the direction, trying to turn the ship the oil tanker that is science in a gradual or in a gentler turning circle.
I think, and there's lots of, there have been lots of thinkers, who have been trying to sort of do the same. And I think that our worldviews are changing away from this sort of big focus on sort of rationalism and logic being the key way with which you can just run the world. And actually this greater recognition that there is a massive role for spiritual development, human spiritual development. And that's what has just been, forgotten, maybe not forgotten, but pushed to the kind of lower substrata of our kind of consciousness. But actually, I think now there's a great recognition that we've developed quite well technologically, but if we don't have the wisdom to control that technology, then it's very dangerous. So these approaches to developing sort of wisdom,
the left and right brain thing,
and wisdom at individual level and wisdom at the sort of organizational level as well. And so some of that comes into sort of systems thinking, and there's lots of approaches now to sort of think about how to train business managers and politicians, etc., in systems thinking. And actually some really nice, interesting stuff showing that very highly right-wing conservative thinkers aren't very good at systems thinking. They like things black and white, and they don't like to tolerate ambiguity. They like things certain.
Left brain.
Yeah, but the mind, the world is inherently, complex and uncertain. And actually you need to sometimes hold that uncertainty and think about, an event might have multiple causes, not just one. And if a person appears to be lazy, it's not just because they're lazy and the end of story. It's like, well, what is causing the constraints on their, doing something? And maybe it's, an outer constraint, or maybe there's something that happened when they were young, they were abused, or there's lots of different causes that meet to affect something. And that sort of ability to think in that systems way is very important for problems like climate change and other environmental problems and social problems as well. So I think, that's a scientific reason not to vote too right wing, perhaps.
I won't be voting right wing. Sure.
But got a big uplift. You've got the right songwriter for uplifting positive, because your message is positive in the heart. Which is great.
Yeah, emotional people. Our producer I worked with once kept saying, "Wow, you've got a lot of emotionally uplifting songs." And I was like, "It's just how my brain works."
Yeah, no, I think it's great, and and I hope, I hope the ideas come across. I'm not sort of being too negative, because I think there's a danger when you talk about big global environmental problems, it can seem a bit sort of negative. But I think, as I said, the key message is one of sort of empowerment and and connectedness. But your songs maybe are just right, I think. And I said to Jack, I can't, that the 1, 2, 3, 4 song that you wrote for Feist is I can't listen to it without a big sort of smile and uplifting.
Oh,
So, yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah.
That'd be something if she inspires a global hit for about the self-delusion.
Yeah, if you could just do that again, that'd be great.
Brilliant. Well, if there's anything else, I mean, any other final thoughts, anyone?
Just to say thanks, really, because it's lovely to kind of chat to you, but also to, the idea that, Sally might be able to write a song which just incorporates a few of these ideas is really exciting. And I kind of, as I said, I think the, linking kind of art with science to me is something that's really important, and to be done in a more meaningful way. Because as a scientist, sometimes just quickly, I suppose that some of the research councils recognize the importance of like art and science working together, but often it's a bit of a kind of add-on. They'll say, "Oh, here's a big science experiment. Now we're going to get an artist to come and like, draw a couple of pictures and stick them on the wall at the conference or something." And I don't think, to me, that's not quite the same as the sort of more deeper sort of integration of putting ideas in as a sort of base of a song, for example, or the base of artwork, etc. And also
this what we're doing is the exact thing that you talk about in the Self-Delusion, is that we are connecting and
Oh, there we
creating
go.
together. So, yeah.
Money.
Yeah, no,
Well,
it's we. Yeah, whenever we speak to people, we're literally changing their brains, aren't we? So
Yeah, totally.
you
Yeah.
kind of forget that you're the kind
well,
of ways of neural activation are sort of reflecting in each other's pattern, each other's minds.
also, if you were a songwriter, Tom, this was something you would be doing because you've won a few awards for communicating science to the layman or woman. So
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not very good at songwriting. I've been playing the djembe drums recently in a group, but I'm not sure I could write songs to the level of you two. So I'll rely on the professionals, I think.
yeah, but it's condensing down an idea, isn't it? So people can digest it more easily.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks so much for spending the time.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, and look forward to connecting more. Yeah.
All right. We'll keep you updated with our progress.
Super. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
I'll stay on with Sally for a moment and just talk
yeah.
about
Okay.
the song.
Cool. Okay. Take care. Just bye.
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 Well, how was that?
Hi, good. Yeah. Was that okay?
Oh yeah, super. It touches so many different areas, doesn't it? Of
Yeah. It's fascinating. That's why, yeah, reading the book, it's just each page, it's just like a fascinating story. And then this other, like, it's really, I found it just completely relatable and interesting. And yeah, it's good.
yeah, I haven't read it yet. He's going to send me a copy, so I didn't have time to read the PDF, but reading on the screen like that, he's going to send us the real deal. So, also had one song about tragedy of the commons, which is another idea where everyone you have to rush down to cut down all the trees before other people do. And it's this race to the bottom. So it really ties in with so many different other subjects I've talked about, and also with those when I was thinking about those ants, how it should be a queen at the front though, but in our society it's often a man with a harem, and
Yeah.
these billionaires are now owning. I think it's the top 5 or 6 people or 8 people have as much wealth as 50% of the poorest popular people in the world.
Mm.
It's like some crazy accumulation of wealth and madness,
Mm.
delusion of self, and
I loved how I had my list of questions, and about my second or third question was about ants. And he just and to comment on his fascination with ants. And he just started talking about it straight away before I even got to the question. That they've just shaped his life. He's really funny.
I was still a bit confused about to what extent he was religious or spiritual. He's kind of skirted around it, or was that just me?
Oh, in the book, I think he makes it clear in the book that he doesn't believe in God, like a Christian God. Or, I think, but he's definitely spiritual. I would probably describe myself as being the same. Because I love yoga and meditating, and I don't know, but I definitely don't sort of, you know, agree that much with organized religion or believing in God, that kind of God.
Whether there is a spirit behind all the just because when people talk about DNA and the being molecules and you're this many pieces of that much, you're just the matter. I kind of get a bit like I am more that I am conscious. I know it's like when you're trying to argue with someone that they're conscious about consciousness these days, it feels like bit of a headbang.
Yeah.
But I'll have to read I have to read the book, get him on again.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. It's great.
All right.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I'll have a go at a little song as well, and can't wait to hear what you come up with, and we can bounce some ideas back and forth. And
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. How did you want to do it? Just like just that sort of thing.
yeah, I'm sure we're going to go with your song, but I always do it back up just in case someone is, or we can. Sometimes they just one line I made because I made a lot of notes. So maybe one
Yeah.
lyric can help you with something, or
Yeah.
but I'm talking to not many of my you're the most professional songwriter I've had on the show, so I don't really have an issue with
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 me
you. I
being
mean,
boss.
you sneeze the songs, so yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, I'll have a bit of a go, and we'll just keep in touch and just take it from
Beautiful.
there.
Super excited, Sally.
Okay. Great.
All right, good
Have a
evening.
good day.
I will.
Yeah. I'm all tired. I look very
Must be.
tired. All right, bye.
Bye bye.
Walking all through the night as though in a dream, up till early light, sweet sunbeam. Good for me, oh good for me. We play like a team. Your energy in front of me is what I need. Open your eyes, see the chemistry fly. We promise to be there for each other, be there for each other under the stars. This is who we are. We promise to be there for each other, be there for each other. Now there's no turning back. We play for keeps. Flowers in the field, oh they bloom for me, they bloom for you. Aid to open your eyes, see the chemistry fly. We promise to be there for each other, be there for each other under the stars. This is who we are. We promise to be there for each other, 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 be there for each other. Air energy. We open up the gates and walk a while, walk a mile through overgrown ferns and wistful trees, pines in the breeze and lush green vines, and a river that flows by you and I, and the energy between